Hey there, HomeLabbers, self-hosters, IT pros, and engineers. Rich here. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Jeff Reddy, CEO and founder of Scale Computing, about their enterprise virtualization software known as HyperCore, his thoughts and opinions on the state of virtualization post-Broadcom, and the future of virtualization as a whole. Let's get to it. All right, let's welcome Jeff Reddy, CEO of Scale Computing. Jeff, thank you so much for taking time on your busy schedule to kind of talk with me, go over Scale Computing and the virtualization landscape as a whole, because things are still pretty crazy out there, and I think you have a unique perspective on the whole thing.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, and certainly it's been an interesting few months here. So.
Yeah, I wanted to start this by kind of giving a little anecdote about how I came to meet you and learn about Scale, because I think it describes why I wanted to have this conversation. And you had reached out to me. It was roughly 6 months ago, right after I released my It's Been a Rough 2 Weeks video about the fallout of the changes from Broadcom. And you had reached out to say via a Discord DM, like, hey, there's other alternatives out there. Have you ever heard of us? Things aren't as bad as they seem. There's ways forward. And so that was really kind of my first experience with Scale Computing in general, to be honest. I mean, I come from a background of what I'd call institutionalized infrastructure virtualization. Yep. I think we should start with having you introduce, for people who may have not heard of Scale Computing or HyperCore, the company, the products, the background of the org.
Yeah, sure. So I am the founder as well as the CEO. So it started. I'm at home for the show today. It started in my basement, so just down the stairs from where I'm sitting right now. About almost 17 years ago. So I've been a VMware alternative since day one. In fact, the original business plan was literally just one line that said compete with VMware. That was it. You thought we had to have an alternative, and we did things a little bit differently. But I wasn't surprised, right, that you didn't know us. We have a lot of customers. I mean, I have 30,000 deployments globally, but it's not 400,000 customers like VMware has, and having that recognition. And up until recently, the only time that someone like you would sort of come up for air and maybe even consider a VMware alternative is when you were refreshing your infrastructure overall, servers and storage, right, and the whole deal, right? And so we would have to catch you right then, right? So maybe there's a 1 to 6 month window where that's even a consideration, and then you're signed up for another 5 years of VMware and servers and so forth. You don't think about it anymore, right? Obviously that's different now. Everybody's thinking about something different, but that's that's what we've been doing for a long time. The product itself, our virtualization stack is called HyperCore. It is a hyper-converged infrastructure stack. So it's, in fact, in a weird bit of internet history, I'm the one who coined the phrase hyperconvergence, which is somewhat ironic. I think it became synonymous with a bunch of different companies, including, Nutanix at the big enterprise side and so forth. But when we came out with our storage stack, which is called Scribe, which is transparent to you, it's underneath everything. But that storage stack, bringing that together with the hypervisor and the rest of the infrastructure is where the term came from. It was actually a shortened version of hypervisor converged infrastructure. So you may remember back in, 2010-ish, and we launched this product in 2011 or 2012. But in 2010, kind of converged infrastructure was all the thing. There were, EMC was doing stuff and all these things. And so, right, so we were piggybacking off of that converged infrastructure concept and including the hypervisor as part of that stack, and hence hyper-converged infrastructure sort of became that term. And then what happened is everybody just loved the term, and it became synonymous with virtual storage, right? Which is exactly the opposite of what I was trying to convey, but hey, whatever. So you can imagine myself, laughing to myself when I'd go meet somebody from, Dell or HP or somebody. They hand me a business card that says they're the GM of hyperconverged infrastructure. And I'm like, I literally just made that up, right? But that's okay. But that was the concept, right? So we were competing with VMware. We had a hyperconverged infrastructure stack. This is well before there was vSAN or anything like that. And really, not to bore you with a long intro, right? But the whole reason I started the company was myself and my co-founders had developed an AI model. I say I was doing AI before it was cool, right? But an AI model to detect problems in an IT infrastructure stack, and then have the smarts to take steps to correct said problems. Right? It was the recognition that most IT problems are actually pattern recognition problems, and that's what AI can do. It's really the only thing AI can do. Despite all the hubbub about it, right? It's all pattern recognition. And so the idea was underneath everything, this is below the virtualization stack, below the storage stack, there's a series of sensors, effectively software sensors, that are deployed throughout the infrastructure, and there's thousands of them, right? And if you envision that, if you could look at any one time and see like a panel of light bulbs that represented the state of each of these conditions, and they could be healthy, so maybe the light bulb's green, they could be unhealthy and the light bulb could be red, or maybe you're getting bogus data, which, as I'm sure you know, happens a lot in IT, right? You like, how much free space is on drive 7, and you don't get an answer, right? Well, that doesn't mean, maybe the drive's still there, right? Or you get like -6 gigs, which doesn't make any sense, and you get all this stuff. And so we sort of turn that light bulb off, right? But if you imagine I had 1 million of these light bulbs in front of me, at any moment in time, it makes a pattern, and that pattern tells you a lot about the environment. And so this system underneath was designed to effectively do pattern recognition, identify the normal problems that happen, right? The services need to be restarted, stuff needs to be moved around, whatever it is, and then do it, right? And ultimately make life easier for the administrator, who doesn't need to sit there and babysit that stuff. And so that's what made us different, right? I mean, we did the hyperconverged thing, and apparently that maybe made us more different. But at the time, I was just thinking like it was just that AI layer, right, is what made us different and easier to use and manage. And so, we kind of became known as the HCI guys for mid-sized companies. We have big enterprise customers, we have little tiny customers, we run the gamut, but you can see where, if you were Ford Motor Company with 350 IT guys, this AI modeling that I'm talking about is cool, but somebody walks around and can check cables every day, right? Like it's you sure. Literally have a full staff. On the other hand, if you're 1,000-person construction company in Cleveland with 25 job sites and 3 IT guys, right, this is actually really helpful, right? To know that, hey, when something, a server fails at job site 14 and nobody's there, but everything keeps running, like this, everything failed over and stuff moved around, and you can still print, or you could do whatever you need to do, right? Everything still works. That's really handy. And that's just, we sort of just fit that, that segment really well. So
cool. Yeah. I definitely see the benefit in that, right? That's something, especially when you look at alternatives on the market, you tend to have to pay a lot of money in additional licensing to get just in the door to start looking at those sort of automations to be proactively monitoring your workloads and doing that stuff. So that's an interesting differentiator that it's there built in. It's the foundation of the whole platform. So, other than the AI, watching and proactively responding to events, is there anything that differentiates the HCI solutions from everyone else that's in the market these days?
I mean, if you get into the technical weeds, for sure, right? I mean, so what you'll find with, maybe at this point everybody else's HCI except ours, I don't know the whole market, right? But I know that the major players, most HCI stacks are, and this is actually kind of a knock against them, they are virtualized SANs that are running as a VM, right? So basically the SAN controller runs as a VM, and that can consume a lot of resources on the nodes that it's running. Our stack exists our HCI stack actually exists outside of the hypervisor. And so on any given system, we will consume about a tenth of a CPU core and anywhere from less than a gig of RAM to like 4 gigs of RAM for the whole stack, the HCI and everything else, right? And so it's a much lighter weight storage stack, which sometimes doesn't matter much, right? I mean, if you've got a large budget, you're deploying 1,000 servers. Well, yeah, I mean, if I can save you 10% of the servers or 20% of the servers, that's cool, but maybe it doesn't matter. On the other hand, if you're limited on space, limited on budget, and you need to pack everything you possibly can into what you can get, then it becomes a very good fit, right? I mean, running on stuff like this Intel NUC, right? I mean, we'll run on the exact same, is no changes. I mean, literally the exact same software stack that could run on something like this with, as little as 4 gig of RAM total is what would run on a 4U great big rack mount server, right? So that flexibility is pretty cool. You can also mix and match the hardware together. I mean, it might look a little funny, but I mean, you could have those 4U systems running right in the same cluster with this little NUC, right? And everything would work just fine. And that's, it's one of those things that, does that happen often? Well, I mean, probably not that extreme, doesn't happen that often, but certainly what does happen is you buy something today and in 6 months or a year when you want to expand your environment, well, you probably don't want to buy a server that's 6 months old or that much closer to end of life, right? So you can always buy the latest, the RAM different, the CPU families could be different, all that's okay, right? The software will actually pool all that together and make it easy. So it helps you with your sort of total life cycle management, right? And not being stuck in the and that part of the technology actually originates from something that's not as relevant as it used to be, although if you still use a traditional SAN, it is. But back in the day, if you bought a SAN and you had I had a SAN with 250 gigabyte drives in it, right, at one point. Mm-hmm. And they all had to be the same 250 gigabyte drive. And
absolutely,
when that drive's going end of life, you had this weird thing where the cost per gigabyte actually started to increase because the supply of the drives went down and everybody was rushing out to buy these drives and stuff. So that, we tried to get away from that old way of doing things.
That's really cool. I think that also kind of speaks to flexibility for customers and companies who, it's like you actually kind of hit it dead on the head with, especially during the generational transition of CPUs, where who's going to buy the existing model when you're going to upgrade to what's going to be the next gen, and here you are. What do you do with that? Do you go buy another old box? That's a very interesting thing. Speaking of that, then I guess maybe one more question, just as overall to kind of flesh out HyperCore in general. Then, how do you guys deploy HyperCore? Then is it a software people buy licenses and from Scale and they get the software, or is this a turnkey appliance? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, and the long answer is we're expanding even that. So historically we've sold either appliances, right? So you would buy this and it would show up with the software on it, or a Dell server that we integrate with all the major vendors, right? But a server would show up with everything on it, and it's turnkey. You turn it on, give it an IP address, and you're off and running. The alternative would be if you had a system that was an exact match to something on our HCL, you could, we could give you the software, you could install it, and effectively turn that device into an appliance. Now there's advantages to that, which include, we manage the software stack manages the entire system, the BIOS, the microcode, the whole deal, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really sort of a set it and forget it kind of thing, like meant to be super super easy. And part of the right, so going back to my earlier comments, right, part of the challenge was, okay, you had VMware before, and 8% of our customers are coming to us from VMware. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
Hyper-V, but it's almost all VMware, right? So
Right.
you had VMware, you're looking at buying new servers. We're giving you an appliance that has the server, the storage, everything built in, and you're good to go. And that might be very appealing for certain environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we hadn't traditionally done was say, here's downloadable software, install it on whatever you want to. And it's not because we couldn't do it. It's just that there was literally no demand for that. Now with the Broadcom VMware thing, that has changed, right? And now people who do have servers that are 6 months old are suddenly saying, hey, I might be interested in trying this out. So we are expanding that right now. We offer this through our partners, so you can't download it from our website, but you could contact us, and we'd put you in contact with one of our partners, and they could get you the software, and you can install HyperCore on other gear, right? And it'll pop up, depending on how compatible it is, it'll pop up. It may say experimental, it may say whatever. But of course, at that point, the hardware is your problem, right? The advantage of the appliance is the hardware is also our problem, right? So it just sort of depends on what you need. And we primarily now use the that software version for proof of concept, workbench, HomeLab, that kind of stuff, right? And so if you a customer or customer prospect said, hey, I want to put this thing, I want my guys to put this in their house, right? Well, then we'd make that available to them. We don't, but and eventually we'll get to where you can just download it and install it, but it's just been not, again, the demand has totally changed. So before there was nothing for it, and now it's like everyone would love to try it. But it is different, right? I mean, if you look at other VMware alternatives, like like a Proxmox or something like that, I mean, this is quite a bit different than that, right? So again, with the AI stuff, and if you're looking at edge computing is where we've done a lot of work. That's where these little things come into play, right? It's edge we've been doing this for 16 years, so it hasn't all been edge computing, because that's a newer thing, but
relatively new, right?
Yeah, relatively new. But with now you see AI apps, and people want to run the inference part of AI out where the data is, instead of sending it all back and forth, or for lots of reasons, cost being a big one of them. But if you're thinking about, okay, well, there's an opportunity, Broadcom is sort of forcing your hand, right, and saying, okay, maybe you need to look for something else. Well, you might just look for, I just need something to run a VM, and maybe Proxmox, or maybe KVM, just generic open source or whatever is the answer.
Right.
On the other hand, right, it's like, okay, well, this is more of a, Scale's obviously more of a fully integrated solution, fully supported solution. But also, if you're thinking, well, the future is I am going to have edge computing in some way, shape, or form, right? Even if you're not deploying it now, right? Maybe you work for a manufacturer, right? Well, it's one thing to have a traditional data center or even a server room, on site, but we're seeing people not only deploy infrastructure like this on the factory floor, but they're putting it in, stuff that moves, like cranes and forklifts and stuff like this. And so you do, if that's, and they have cameras on there that do these AI things and all kinds of interesting stuff. And so it's like, okay, well, Scale is not only a VMware replacement, but it's also something to kind of move you down that path, right? Whether now, or whether it's just something you're planning for in the future. So.
Interesting. So it sounds like there may be a HomeLab version in the future, maybe not necessarily the near future, but the future where people can, because I ask because I always have to beat this drum, and I apologize for doing it in front of you, but like a lot of where my passion for virtualization came from, and how I got into this career in general, was from being able to run it at home, right? To learn that stuff and get familiar with it so that I could go advocate for stuff like that when I went to work. So is that coming?
Yeah, no, that's coming. And like I said, if you're looking at Scale right now, we can get anybody a HomeLab version, right? It's just we just haven't sort of released it to the public. And and again, it's not rocket science, right? We just have to
Sure.
package it up and make sure, certain things are secured that otherwise might not be, and whatever, right? We have to lock it all down and, make sure it's all good to go and test it differently. It's just, and it needs to be supported on an ongoing basis, where previously
Right.
with no demand, I mean, it's great to get, if you would download it and play around with it and love it, I mean, that's great. But, getting your attention in the world of VMware was nearly impossible. So,
Yeah.
we would have to put it out there and maintain it. And then it's like it's like the open source project that nobody contributes to, right? Like that's no
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm with
So,
you.
but that's changed. That's changed. So we're very quickly working towards, a full downloadable HomeLab version, and, on a spot basis, we're handing it out right now. So.
Great. Well, I think this is a good opportunity, since we just mentioned VMware, to kind of transition off. I think that you, in your position as a man running a company that's selling virtualization, has a unique perspective on where we are in this current landscape. Because, I mean, holy cow, man, I've never in my life have I seen so much change happen so quickly from so many companies. It's where I started in the beginning with the Broadcom situation, was like, oh boy, the sky is kind of falling, right? But I am quickly changing my tune to see it more as a net positive, where all of a sudden there's room for companies to breathe. There's room for innovation. Like, I didn't realize how much of this of the 800-pound gorilla that was VMware was kind of suppressing innovation.
Yeah.
So I want to get your take on this as a man you're on the front line of this, running scale. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, what you just said is certainly true, right? I think that, having something like VMware, which was, not a true monopoly, but was like near monopoly in its reach, right?
Right.
It just shields you from even seeing that stuff like scale existed, right? Like, you just wouldn't look for it. And so, did you know that you could have AI manage your whole infrastructure 16 years ago? Probably not, right? But
Probably not.
there it was. So that stuff exists, and I think that, so that's certainly a good thing. I had an analyst tell me that it's kind of like, if you imagine, there's Coke versus Pepsi, right? And then imagine that Coca-Cola went away, right? Everybody would flock to Pepsi, except in this case, there is no Pepsi, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like Coca-Cola went away, and now it's like there's a whole bunch of, smaller guys, right? And
Right.
everybody's going to like find, and it's interesting because, all the smaller guys like us have, particular use cases where it's a good fit, right? And you can find those use cases. We already had a lot of our customers would run us and VMware at the same time, because it's like, okay, well, we're going to run scale at the edge, or run scale on the factory floor, or in our remote offices, and do something else. And, you can do all that kind of stuff. I will say, though, the the rate of change with the Broadcom deal is what surprised even me. I mean, going back, when they first announced the deal over a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I guess now. Um, you could look at the history of what Broadcom has done with other acquisitions. You could see what was likely to happen,
Mm-hmm.
which is what's happened. What surprised me, though, is the speed at which it happened. Right? I kind of expected, well, okay, yeah, they're gonna raise prices, they're gonna, cut, I'll call it cut innovation, but they're gonna focus their innovation and do these different things. And so but I thought that would take years, right? Like, it would just sort of like quietly happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really been two things, right? There's what certainly is most visible to you, which is all the stuff that impacts the end user of the product, right?
Right.
The bundling, the pricing changes, eliminating, certain, particularly less expensive versions, or the free version, right? All that stuff
Sure.
going away, right? That's obvious. But then also, they've been super disruptive to their reseller channel, all the partners that work with VMware. And, when early in my career, literally I was in high school, and at one point I had my own little reseller, and I worked for a reseller, and I'm very sensitive to that world, right? And most resellers. Those could range from MSPs to, to large system integrators like Accenture and CDW to,
Hmm.
literally two guys and a dog, right? I mean, you have the
Right.
whole gamut, and they're often the trusted advisor for their customer, whoever it might be, right? They work hand in hand. And this is how I got involved in it. My dad was an IT guy. There was a partner, it was all IBM mainframe stuff back in the day, but there was a company called Master Computer Systems that my dad partnered with when he was running IT. That's who ended up hiring me when I was in high school, right? So it was like this very close relationship. And and VMware was an all channel company, as Scale
Right.
is as well, right? Built from the channel. And then they build the thing up. The channel is who brings those customers to bear,
Hmm.
right? They have the relationships. And then Broadcom just comes in and like takes over 10,000 customers, just says, okay, now they're what they call it strategic, and they're taking it direct. But if that was your customer, it feels like they stole it,
Right.
right? And that's super disruptive. And I it breaks, it breaks a lot of stuff, right? And I don't know. I mean, on a personal level, like that really irritates me, right? Because I just know that. I mean, yeah, and they'll make the excuse like, well, the big customers or strategic customers want, they use the term bespoke, which I always think of like making a suit, but whatever. I mean, a bespoke solution, right? I'm like, well, yeah, everybody wants that,
Yeah,
right?
of
Like
course.
that's what the partners do, right? Like it's like,
Exactly.
oh yeah, they know all this stuff. They bring these things together. They're tuning into the the podcast here, right? This
Hmm.
is what they do. They know that stuff, and it just it's such a weird thing to see, right? Like to see that how many all these changes happen. I guess it is what they do, but I don't know. It feels weird, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly has been a whirlwind change. What do you think that this is for? Maybe from Scale's perspective, this has obviously really opened up a lot of potential customers too, right? So I mean, with the landscape changing, people being able to come up for air and talking to their VARs and asking, or their their channel partners asking, you know, what else is out there. Like I imagine this has had just a massive impact on your company's visibility, and I'm sure it's been great. I hope it's been great because like how else
it
could you not, right?
yeah, no, it's been extreme, really. I mean, and we're not we're not a startup, right? I mean, we're
Right.
a sizable company, but we saw demand from Q4 last year to Q1 this year, right? And then I'm talking about calendar quarters. So basically,
Right.
October, November, December to January, February, March, we saw an 80% increase in demand, like one quarter to the next, like bam, bam.
Yeah.
And we're up probably 300%, year to year. And it's, and even that, and that's happening even though there's still a lot of, folks out there like you were that don't know who we are, right? I don't
Right.
have a Super Bowl commercial, right? I wish I did at this
Right.
point, but I, it's, but I don't. Um, and that's the thing, right? And I think what's interesting is kind of get back to your previous question, that demand is happening, but it's also it's created an opportunity where the customers and their partners can look and say, okay, like this is just reality. This has happened. So
Hmm.
now what is the move? Like what moves can we make that may help us over the long term, right? Instead of, initially there was certainly a lot of panic, right? Like, oh
Oh
my
yeah.
God, I got to get off this thing. I got to pick something and just jump it. And some people did, and that's fine. But now, okay, like take a deep breath. Yeah, you're going to want to get off of VMware, but what is the long-term solution? And we've seen a significant uptick in companies actually deploying edge computing, because it's like, okay, well, maybe edge computing was on my 5-year kind of sort of maybe roadmap,
Hmm.
and now it's like, well, all right, we could try something because we're going to have to change VMware anyway. And if we do something like Scale, then that gives us that flexibility. So it's one of those things that I think there is it does spur on a little innovation that maybe was going to take longer before.
Yeah, that actually kind of leads me to my next question, and that is, that might just excuse me, dovetailing exactly what you just said, but it sounds like this opportunity for people to reconsider where they're at and maybe go, you know what, now we have to let's look at what the future looks like. Let me ask you, what do you think the future of virtualization, whether infrastructure or edge computing, looks like as a whole? And yeah, I want to get your opinions on that, where you think it's going.
Yeah, I think I think that we talk about edge computing and cloud computing and traditional data center, and these are, of course, locations where you can
Yeah.
run applications, right? And, obviously, I mean, we use the cliche, the future is hybrid, right? The reality is, if you get the right software stack in place, you just run the apps wherever they make the most sense. It doesn't I mean, you're not going to, there's no reason to pick one over the other. You're just going to use
Right.
all those resources and run the applications. And I think in the same way, when you think about, okay, virtualization and containerization, okay, containers are more modern than VMs, and you run containers on scale like anything else. And
Mhm.
the point being, like, okay, at some level, if the software is sophisticated enough, who cares, right? Like, just
Yeah,
run the
that's fair.
app. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, once the app is up and running, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
really matter if it's a VM or a container or something else. You're just going to run the app, and probably, and this has been very visible to us because we've been doing edge computing for several years. The biggest challenge of edge computing is the cost of putting somebody in a white truck or a white van and sending them on site, right? Because
Right.
usually, you're talking about like retail stores or the factory floor. You don't want to shut down the steel mill to go jack around with the robot, right? Like, that's
Hmm.
not convenient. And so, to be able to deploy an infrastructure that can sort of run everything, right? Like VMs and containers. Don't, because you're not going to want to run one edge infrastructure for containers and a different one for VMs. Like, that's impractical given,
Right.
limitation. In the data center, maybe you could do it, but at the edge, not so much. But if you can do it, if you can do a hybrid infrastructure at the edge, then why not run a hybrid infrastructure sort of everywhere, right? And make it transparent. The other thing I think it's interesting is, if you do, I mean, what software like Scale does for edge computing is you turn your distributed edge into a de facto private cloud. You're going to manage it in that way, right? If you're running one location, it just feels like you're running a one server at one location, or three servers or whatever at one location.
Hmm.
But if I have 1,000 locations, right, you don't think of those as 1,000 individual instances. You kind of manage them all as one. And when that happens, there's some pretty interesting things that can change. So, as an example, we think about uh, AI and neural network based AI stuff, and I think, sort of at this point, most people understand there's a training aspect that happens with
Right.
AI, and so you need 10,000 GPUs for a month or something, right? And
Hmm.
that feels like that's a cloud workload, right? Like, you're probably not going to
Yeah.
buy 10,000 GPUs to use them for a month. And then there's the inference part, which is, I need something, maybe I need one GPU to do something. So I've seen a lot of customers in retail run these applications that do uh, shoplifting detection, right? So apparently, theft at self checkout stations is a real problem.
Hmm.
And so, and a lot of it's organized crime, as it turns out. Go figure, right? But
Interesting. Yeah.
they use AI and computer vision to basically detect that somebody at a checkout stand is moving their hands in a certain way that indicates they might be stealing stuff, and it can
Sure.
flag it for security inside the store or what have you. Well, the training part of that took some big model. The inference part of it takes about a $400 GPU in the checkout lane. Now, to run a $400 GPU 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the cloud is like $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Oh yeah.
that's not, doesn't work for the grocery store. Like, $400
Hmm.
one time or 30 grand a year, right? Like, that's not going to fly. So
Right.
you deploy the one GPU. Well, if I have 1,000 stores and 20 checkout lanes per store, like, now I've deployed 20,000 GPUs. And maybe the training part of the model doesn't have to be a public cloud thing after all. right? You get this kind of weird thing. Initially, yes, nobody's going to deploy all that to do the training,
Sure.
but eventually, right, you do have all of these resources at your disposal. And again, and so who knows, right? You can run some workloads that would run in the cloud, run at the edge, some at the edge in the cloud. The thing that I like to point out as it relates to the edge is it's not just a location to run applications. Because if it was, we would just call it remote office, branch office, like we always did.
Yeah,
Right.
the
Like
robos,
that's a
right.
thing. Right. But what makes the edge different is the tooling to kind of, like I said, in a short version, to turn it into a private cloud, but the tooling that allows you to change the way applications are deployed and managed and even created. Because originally, if you can Google this, right? It's a comical thing to see. If you Google Gartner Magic Quadrant for public cloud 2010,
Okay.
right? You will find that Gartner determined the leaders of public cloud were companies like AT&T, Verizon, and Rackspace, right? Which is just laughable, right?
Right. Yeah.
And Amazon is on there not as a leader but as a visionary. Google and Microsoft aren't on there at all, right?
Hmm.
But the thing is, at the time, everyone was thinking of public cloud as a great big data center, right?
Right.
And those are all big, AT&T had a big data center, and Rackspace obviously has a big data center, and so on and so forth. But that isn't, as we now know, that isn't what public cloud really is, right? Yes, some applications running in the cloud moved there from somewhere else. Most of them were just created there, right?
Hmm.
And that's where they run. And that's what's going to happen with Edge, right? It's, if you think about Edge purely as, well, what applications might I move to the edge or run there, like that limits your view, like, to this. But if you think about, oh no, if I have cloud-like resources at my disposal and I can run a few commands and deploy a new app and do these kinds of things, you actually very quickly see it's much more like the cloud than it is, traditional, infrastructure. So, that's going to take years to get from here to there. But I'm already seeing the early stages of that. I mean, it's very common. And this is specific to the edge computing side, and we do the data center side too. But, I'll see customers that say, I think I have 2 applications I want to run at the edge. And then they deploy the infrastructure, and 6 months later, they have 25 applications they're running there, right? They didn't think of it at the time, but that happened with the cloud too. I'm going to move this application there, and all of a sudden it's like, it used to take you, it would take you a week if you wanted to screw around with some application that needed a SQL database, and you had to stand up a server and install SQL and get it all configured. And then, and now you click a button and 4 seconds later,
Right.
you've got a
The template
SQL
is ready.
instance. Yeah, it's all ready to go. That's what's happening right at the edge. So, so Edge is coming, and there's many reasons to run apps there versus in the cloud, and many reasons to run apps in the cloud versus at the edge, right? I mean, it works both ways. So.
I appreciate your perspective on this because as someone who doesn't really have a good appreciation for where the edge is, you're kind of opening my eyes up, and it almost feels like, in a lot of ways, granted, it all works, like you said, in one big kind of holistic sphere, but the edge kind of feels like the new cloud for organizations, especially if you have a lot of sites, right? Like, you didn't even think about the possibility of like expanding that as shifting workloads to do what you need to do, and that is a fascinating perspective. I dig that.
It's a very interesting thing. And it's an interesting thing to see, and I've seen it happening in retail and manufacturing, both of which I've mentioned here, most rapidly. And I think partly because these are the two kind of markets where I've seen the most actual adoption of AI stuff so far. I mean, besides the consumer-facing stuff like ChatGPT and what have you, but
Sure.
Being able to run AI applications, and that's changing the way people think of these. What was previously just the remote infrastructure, right? And it's like, okay, if I'm going to actually start running mission critical workloads out on the factory floor, or out at this remote site or in that grocery store, I need to think about it a little bit differently than maybe, if you went into the typical, retail store not thinking about this, what you'll find is they have like 3 tower servers in the back somewhere,
Right.
running a point of sale system, running video surveillance. And I run into that all the time. And my first question is, when's the last time somebody updated the BIOS on those servers? Right. And the answer is the day it left the factory. Like nobody ever
Yeah,
touches it. Right.
exactly.
And it's a security nightmare. Right. I mean, literally, there have been major retailers have been hacked because somebody literally walked in with a USB stick and just
Right.
stuck it in something. Right.
Yeah.
So, you get, it's a mess. And then there's, I talked to a company it's a chain of gas station convenience stores, right? So they have a point of sale system. I won't name the vendor, but in order to update the point of sale system, which is running on a physical server, they have to take the store offline, apply the update, and they can do that remotely, but they have to do them one at a time. And they had about 600 stores, and about a third of the time it wouldn't work. And then somebody had to wake up in the middle of the night and drive out to the store and fix it. And so they would budget. They said, we went through the math. We would budget $400,000 to do a firmware update for 600 stores. Wow. And so what does that mean? Well, it means they don't do them is what it means.
Yeah,
right.
That's exactly right.
So, right. And which is of course the bad actor's dream, right? To know, okay, like script kiddie type stuff, right? I can go online and here's the known exploits for this version. Right. Walk in there and that's probably what they're running, right? Like it's crazy. So, so AI is driving a lot of the change. And in the absence of, Broadcom VMware, right? That might be what you and I were talking about, like how AI is changing the way that on-prem infrastructure is going to be. But then you layer the Broadcom thing on, and it's kind of fuel to a fire that was already burning. But now it's being exposed to a lot more people.
Yeah, accelerating that timeline, which may not be for the worst, right? Sometimes it's really beneficial to have that opportunity to jump your timelines forward and give things a shot. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some pretty, it's not always for the worst. I've seen some pretty bad setups that are finally getting upgraded. So that's a good thing.
I guess I'll ask you, before we kind of wrap up here, is there any other thoughts you want to give me on scale computing or HyperCore, or again, it's an opportunity to expose my audience to scale computing and then HyperCore in general. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're looking at if the impetus for you looking around at virtualization options is Broadcom, right? We're worth a look, right? Might not be an exact fit for you, but if you look online, it's there's thousands of case studies published. We're generally the highest rated product and the highest rated support. So it's all, again, as we mentioned, it's all been built for production environments, right? So if you're like, hey, I just want a home lab, kick this thing around, you're not going to find that on the website, although you're welcome to email and we can get you hooked up. Like I said, it's just not yet downloadable. We'll get there though. I know you want it there and we'll get it there. But, for production, it's good. And it's, we talked a lot about edge computing, but again, it's not just edge. Obviously, edge is fairly new, and we've got lots of customers who are using us in, regular data centers from Fortune 500 down to, individual dental offices, right? And, MSPs who use us and deploy us in small businesses. So it's kind of across the map. The thing that's going to feel most different about scale is it is kind of turnkey, really easy. Right. I mean, you can be deploying VMs in 10 minutes from the time you turn the system on. So, if you want all the nerd knobs, as we call them, right? They might not all be visible there. You got to get into the APIs or something to do it. But if you just want to run applications, it's really easy, right? And so, so we've got that. So it's worth it. It's worth a look, right? I'm not going to say it's a fit for everybody, but but it's certainly worth a look. And again, you want to kick tires, we can hook you up with that too. So,
yeah, I just to add to that, since I've had an opportunity to play with scale here, I say that the one thing that I'd like to add is that your user interface is refreshingly different in a good way, and I think that you guys have done a lot to simplify and focus the running of workloads in a way that I think is for people who haven't seen scale, they should definitely go check out, because I think that the way you guys have done the user experience, the way you guys are handling the entire administration perspective is pretty great. So that's my 2 cents into it. But Jeff, I just want to bring this to a close. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And we hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I did. Thanks for having me. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. I'm a geek, so this is all cool stuff for me. But I appreciate you having me on.
And that, friends, will do it for this video. If you liked it, let us know in the comments below. I'd like to do more interviews with different companies and groups throughout the infrastructure technology space. So if you like them and you want to see more or hear more, let me know in the comments below. Special thank you to YouTube members. You guys help keep the lights on, and we thank you for it. If you'd like to help support the channel, consider becoming a member. Buy some of our awesome swag. It helps us keep making these videos. And now that you finished watching this video, how about checking out this playlist over here of other great HomeLab and self-hosting videos we've done in the past. If you're looking for your next great HomeLab idea, we can help.